Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Great Engine opening series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we're going to be taking a look at a variation of the King's Indian Modern Benoni using the fantastic game Leela-Komodo Dragon TCEC Season 22 SubFinal bonus game 53 as the centerpiece of our opening examination. This opening is one of my favourites. It's the Samisch system against the King's Indian that can also transpose into modern Benoni type positions when black plays c5. This specific opening that I chose for the Sufi features an unusual move order that I once faced against the French Grandmaster Jean-Marc Degraeve. And in my opinion, it's an inaccurate move order. So it felt perfect for the Sufi, an interesting pawn structure, but with a slightly inaccurate move order that tips the balance one way. But actually, the engines did an amazing job, generating masses of counterplay for black. So maybe it's even an interesting way for black to play, as long as you play it in an engine-approved fashion. Let's have a look how that goes. So d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, and now the normal King's Indian move is to play d7 to d6, but here Jean-Marc Degraeve played against me castles. The idea actually is that after f3 black plays c5. Vaguely tempting maybe to play d takes c5, but there's even gambits like b6 with the idea of takes queen b6, and black's got a reasonable amount of counterplay on the dark squares. You're attacking b2, you're cutting across this diagonal. This move f3 isn't at all ideal in this sort of structure. I remember that I spent a fair amount of time thinking about doing this. But in the end I just went with the old standard d5, going for my normal structure. And here black plays e6. And what black is doing in this line, it's not quite clear what advantage black's going to gain from it. But black is delaying d6 and just going for a very quick e takes d5. Who knows, maybe delaying d6 will give black some extra quick possibilities of b5, somewhere. Who knows? There is, though, a drawback to playing e6 and not playing the move d6, and that's that white can play knight to h3. Why is this important? Well, this pawn on f3 has got a very specific function. I mean, it defends the pawn on e4, and black's counterplay in the modern Benoni, it arises after going e takes d5, c takes d5. You get the half open e file against the e pawn, and then you try and destabilize the white pieces defending the e pawn with b5 to b4, even as a pawn sacrifice. I mean, we've seen lots of tile games like this. Brilliant. It always happens amazingly. So this pawn on f3 is supporting the pawn on e4, really just reinforcing it in the best way that you possibly can, and basically trying to stifle black's counterplay. Now the one problem, of course, is if you play the move f2 to f3, where do you put this knight on g1? And an ideal square for it is f2. That knight on f2 is out of the way, and it also supports the e4 pawn, so that later we can play a move like f4 and just expand like that. And this is a scenario that's happened a lot in my games. Now if you play d6, then actually you're maybe you don't even realize it, but you're actually stopping this plan knight h3 to f2. But if you play this move order with e6, then we can just play knight h3 straight away, and after d6 knight f2 we've got our ideal setup for white, and we can just carry on with bishop e2. We can go castles if we want, f4, and things really start to move. And again, I've exploited all sorts of ways in which black's allowed you to play an early knight h3 to f2 in my games. I've been playing this system all my life, and it's always turned out to be extremely promising. What actually happened here? Well, a6 was played in our game Leela against Komodo, a4. The idea of a6 is that you want to go e takes d5. E takes d5, c takes d5, and then go b5. So after a6 we play a4 just to stop that from happening. Very common Benoni style. E takes d5, c takes d5. And now black has to decide what to do. I mean, if you just start playing normal moves like knight bd7, we might even throw in a nice little bishop g5 there, just to irritate this knight on f6, and go queen d2 and bishop e2 and castles. And this is a very nice version of this line for white. So in this position, all of the engines, without exception, they all played the move knight e8, getting out of that pin. Bishop g5, and just looking for a very quick f5. And I suppose the point of that is that having played knight h3 to f2, actually white is a little bit vulnerable to black playing a move like f4 quickly afterwards, and then just getting this e5 square perfectly for the knight. If black can do that, get some g5, h5, g4, could be quite dangerous. You know, that's so white has to do something about this. And well, all my engines were playing the move h4, which I liked very, very much. So you're trying to exploit the fact that this knight has moved back to e8 to allow f7 to f5 in order to get in h4 to h5 and the attack on the king side. Very engine play. Now there's a number of interesting ideas here. In general, you know, it's always the worry really, or the dilemma for black. You know, where do you stop this rook's pawn? Do you let it go to h5? Do you let it go to h6? You know, AlphaZero style, thorn pawn style, as King's Crusher calls it, or do you stop it with h7 to h5? There was one interesting matchup here. This was played without a6 and a4 inserted, but this was a game Komodo against Koivisto 7.0 that I had in my engine games, and the game continued g4 h5, bishop e2, knight bd7, g5 knight e8, and yeah, black just brought that knight back to f6 in order to get h5, and then brought it back again. And what I quite liked was the way that Koivisto played it afterwards. So still going for the f5 break, again looking for f4 and knight e5 there. So e takes f5 played, rook takes f5, bishop d3, and then Koivisto sacrificed the exchange in this way, and then played knight c7, and you can line up with queen f7, rook f8. Was sharp, you know, and Koivisto got pretty good compensation against Dragon there in that game. So yeah, interesting plan. Back to our game, however, after h4, basically most of the engines in our recent games played knight d7, h5 and queen e7, and the idea simply is that okay, we're tolerating this pressure on the king side. We're going to play knight c7, rook b8, b5 and get counterplay. Quite unusual, but yeah, quite an interesting plan there. So bishop e2 and rook b8, and now we get a little bit of a divergence. Queen c2 was played here. There were quite a few different moves played actually. Queen c2 was played in one of the pro Sufi games on Navratil's channel, which was quite interesting actually. Queen c2, bishop d4, very common Leela plan in these type of positions. Really wants to yeah, just get this bishop active, and yeah, maybe come in later with counterplay like this. It's very, very interesting. Bishop's a little bit exposed there, but still, yeah, interesting plan. So bishop h6, knight g7, and then f4 was played, and this got very, very sharp. So g takes h5, which was maybe not the best move, and then g4, and well, Stockfish was pretty much launched here. H takes g4, knight takes g4, f5, bishop g5, knight f6, e5, in we go. And well, you may notice there's suddenly this queen on c2. You understand why it's there, because after fg takes, we go queen takes h7 check, king f7. Then Stockfish, you know, obviously launched and plays these attacks brilliantly. Didn't take the rook, played knight e4. This knight's coming into g5, takes, queen e5, rook a3, bishop d7, rook e3, and this is a lovely maneuver. We're threatening all sorts of things here. Rook e8, knight takes f6, queen f6, takes, queen g8, takes, and rook b8, and well, this turned out just to be a winning position for Stockfish. So I mean, really, yeah, you know, really quite amazing play there. There's a few other, yeah, weird and wonderful little ideas. f4 was played by Leela against Stockfish in one of my engine games. The idea being that to go takes and queen d3, which is quite funny, you know, just threatening queen h3 there. So that was pretty interesting as well. Queen d2 was a move that Stockfish played, amazingly enough, against Dragon. Quite an old, long time control game I played. And the idea being that after f5 you take and go queen f4 and try and come around to h2. Again, also very interesting, but those sort of things, you know, Black always managed to deal with, you know, just by going for counterplay in the centre here. F takes c4 was quite decent for Black. So what Leela did in this game was to play the move g4, just going for a big kingside bind and just avoiding committing the queen later. I mean, we saw a number of games, well, I saw a number of games where white played queen c2 and later queen d2, so the free extra move g4 is not bad news at all. Knight c7. G5 actually was played by Leela-Zero in the sub-final, the reverse of this game, and this was very interesting as well because it features again this Leela idea of bishop d4. You can see Leela really does not want to get that bishop trapped. Once this move h6 comes in, the bishop comes around to d4, and this was pretty unusual play actually. So f6 played, knight d1, knight c7, knight e3, and then knight e5. And Leela's actually using tactics to keep this bishop alive, because after knight c2, knight takes d5 happened, with the idea of e takes d5, knight takes f3 check. So knight takes d4 happened, takes, knight c7, castles. And yeah, I mean, this looks incredibly ugly really for Black. You know, you're missing your dark squared bishop. We've got this pawn you know, hitting the g7 square, which is quite dangerous. Split pawns as well, but Black actually is pretty active, and the fact that white doesn't really have any good pawn breaks actually gave Black an awful lot of play. And in the game, you were almost wondering whether Leela was going to actually make something of this, because f5 was played just in time. The white knight was coming round g3 to f5, so f5 was played. E takes f5, knight f4, takes, and well, there was quite a bit of counterplay. I mean, the you know, the queen's coming in here. We've got pressure against f3. So yeah, very, very interesting play there. And g5 actually looks pretty like a pretty good idea to me. But Komodo played knight c7, and you know, this is again a very, very reasonable move, and I had it many times in my engine games. So bishop b3, and now we get him b5, queen d2 from Leela. All sorts of possibilities here. One amazing idea I had was knight e5 in one of my engine games, and after f4 Leela wanted to take on g4, knight g4, b4, knight d1, queen e4, with, yeah, you know, a fair amount of counterplay. This was Stockfish won this game in the end, but it was pretty interesting. Komodo played b takes a4, which kind of feels reasonable. Open up the b file, get some squares, and also get some freedom for the black knights, the black pieces there. So rook takes a4 was played, and now this is where Komodo started to diverge from the TCEC super final. And this was Komodo Dragon against Stockfish in the super final, and Stockfish played rook e8, h6, bishop h8, bishop f1, and rook b3, king g2, queen f8, queen c2, rook b7, rook h3, knight b6, bishop a3, bishop d7, and somehow yeah, the pieces were getting sort of organized there. Rook coming to b8, got some pressure against b2, maybe managed to get the bishop exchange there as well, just to free up your position a little bit. And although I feel that white was more comfortable, black was actually doing quite decently in this game. In this position, Komodo played b takes a4, rook a4, knight b6, rook a2, and now made kind of what I think is a crucial mistake here. Takes some very fine play from Leela to point out its drawbacks, but it is something that I consider to be a positional mistake in these positions. Komodo played the move knight b5. Looks very, very reasonable. I mean, this knight is aiming for d4. Maybe you could even take on c3 and then use this one as a target. But it gives white the opportunity to play knight takes b5, a takes b5. Now, why is this good for white? Well, it does repair the black pawn structure. It also gives black a possible outpost on c4 for the knight. But what it does, it blocks the b-file. And it just means that all black's typical Benoni play, where this bishop and this rook combine in order to attack the b2 pawn, that's gone. And well, black, as you'll see in the game, tries to use the a file, but that's not quite as powerful. And in the meantime as well, what Leela manages to do, it manages to start blocking in this dark squared bishop. I mean, I do wonder whether it might have been worth trying to avoid playing black's next move, because it turns out really badly. Black played the move f6. You'll notice that in the previous game, Stockfish had played rook e8 there in order to meet bishop g5 with queen f8, keeping this diagonal open, whilst also still, providing some dark square support to the black king side. But here black met bishop g5 with f6. And then bishop h4 was played by Leela. So this has had the effect of blocking in the dark squared bishop. What you've also done is you've got the bishop off the e3 square. So it means that knight c4 from black now can be met by queen c1. This knight isn't attacking anything, and we're just going to go b3 and kick the knight back. So knight e5 was played, and now Leela went for the huge bind here. h6, kicking the bishop on g7, back to h8. Looks all right, for black. I mean, you've still got the possibility of going for f5. Well, no, you won't have that, because f4, knight f7, and f5 was played. And just in those in something like 5 moves, you've the whole position has been transformed. Leela's just used space gaining techniques, its pawns, to lock in completely the bishop on h8, and also lock in the bishop on c8, because it's looking at this very strong, Capablanca Bogolubov style pawn structure. I mean, this bishop is just never going to get active either. The key thing always with these large-scale space-gaining plans that Leela loves so much is, will white still have enough to break through? Is it? It's all very well having a great-looking position and restricting the opponent's pieces. Are you still going to be able to break through? Well, I mean, the techniques that Leela demonstrates in this game are really quite amazing. So bishop d7 played, and now actually a very interesting divergence. I mean, I was trying Dragon 3, the latest version of Dragon, on my 94-thread machine against Stockfish, and Dragon was always playing this interesting move, takes, and h7 check. Now if king h7, we go bishop takes f6 check, so black has to go king g7, and this is exceedingly awkward to have the king on g7 in front of the bishop on h8. But you must say that, playing f takes g6 and h7, it's really loosening white's grip on the position. F5 will become possible. We've got all sorts of squares that the knight can use as well, and eventually the king will allow this bishop on h8 to get active. It's quite striking, that Dragon went for this very dynamic approach, but Leela went for this very static approach, and so did Stockfish as well in the games. Just keeping control on the position, and long term you're just going to try and exploit the inactivity of this bishop. So rook 8 was played. Leela has to concede the a file, but of course if the bishop is on h8 blocked in, then pressure on b2 is not going to mean anything at all. So actually white's got quite a bit of time there. King f1, casting artificially, because you need to keep a rook on h1 defending this pawn in case black goes g5 and tries to win it. Knight e5 using that square. Queen b1, rook a4, king g2, and I mean, I played a lot of engine games on, yeah, you know, really good, almost TCEC worthy hardware, and I have to say here that you know, Stockfish was really winning all of the games against Dragon 3 here, and Dragon 3 was failing to win most of these games against Stockfish. So this is clearly one of those positions, you know, that Stockfish and also Leela, I think, handles better than Komodo Dragon. You know, quite interesting to see, you know, these three 3600 plus rated engines, and still, you know, you see some very clear, you know, differences in the types of position they handle well. Now, we noticed, you know, in the SubFinal between Stockfish and Dragon that yeah, block positions were more Stockfish's forte than Komodo's forte, and well, I think that's probably the difference as well in this recent SubFinal match as well. That yeah, you know, both Leela and Stockfish can cause a little bit of damage to Komodo at the moment in block positions. So Komodo waits, and now I have to start organising the pieces, you know, to start pushing back black and look for some invasion channels. One little target could be the pawn on b5, if we can fix that one. So that's what Leela tries to do. You've got to do it with great care though, because you know, you've got weak points. Black doesn't have many active pieces, but Queen, Rook and Knight are still capable of causing some damage. But this knight's coming round to c3, just to hit the rook on a4 and pawn on b5. Bishop d7, knight c3, rook a8. And quite interesting that Stockfish decided, okay, this was one of my engine games against Dragon 3. Then Stockfish just decides, fine, I'm happy. I'm just going to open up the position, and well, you know, my dynamic advantage is open queenside, open lines, and this bishop on h8, which is still miserable. That's going to be enough for me. And yeah, you know, Stockfish did eventually manage to win that game. Leela, very typically, you know, not taking any adventures, but just really aiming to nail down more black weaknesses. Of course, always in there, the danger is the position open enough for you to do something? But yeah. This case turns out to be. So b4, very typical idea in this opening system. c4, you've basically nailed the pawn down to b5. It restricts the bishop on d7, ties it to the protection, and you've got a beautiful knight on c3 in front of the pawn, just blockading and attacking. And yeah, I mean, this knight on c3 can often be a little bit loose, you know, if the black dark square bishop is active, but of course restricted by a pawn on f6, this knight is pretty invulnerable. And well, we can always shore it up with a bishop f2 to d4 as well if we need to. Bishop f3, so we're going to get some maneuvering here. Knight d3, sorry, that went a bit quickly. Knight d3, queen g1. So this queen is probably coming out to d4, and then we'll get this rook nice and active. It's really very slow play from Leela, you know, just to yeah, keep control of the position whilst black's doing everything in its power to yeah, to make life awkward for white. Also, this queen is currently threatening to come into b6 and then b7. So rook a6 played to cover that. Queen d4. Leela not worried about, you know, black taking on b4. We go rook b1, and then we get hold of the b5 pawn afterwards. So Komodo stays still with knight e5, queen d2. And now g5. I wonder about this move, g5. I didn't like it at all. Just because, you know, you had possibilities of g takes f5. You still had some tension. Whereas, you know, once you go g5, it's not there anymore. It does cut off the defense of the queen to the pawn. So it means potentially this rook could be tied down to the pawn on h6. And we could even put some big pressure with queen f8, knight f7. But on balance there, yeah, I would just have wasted a little bit longer with that move. Queen e3 played, bishop e8, and now knight e2. Now Leela starts trying to get some some improvement of its pieces, and it's the typical neural net stuff. You know, you shuffle around on all your outposts continually, and somehow that causes the opponent's position to break. This knight is heading for d4, and then most likely e6, maybe even c6. And of course from d4 it still attacks the pawn on b5, tying down this bishop on e8. Queen a7. This was probably a big mistake from Dragon. You know, I think long term you really have the feeling that this position is going down for black. So keeping the queens on at least keeps some you know, some pressure. And in my engine games, Dragon didn't actually do this. You know, just kept the rooks on like this. But somehow, you know, in the end, you know, Stockfish was able to gradually reel black in, and this is one of my engine games. You know, 30 moves on, and you see that you know, Stockfish has got a knight on e6. It's got the king on b1 here, bishop on b2, just preventing black from invading, and rook a3 is coming in, and you know, we're going to get very similar scenarios to our game. So could well be that this position is, you know, probably already lost, although requiring a huge amount of technical ability to do that. But queen a7 I think makes things a little bit easier, because now black's only got rook and knight to inconvenience white's pieces, and this is not enough. Knight d4, rook a2, bishop e2, king f8, rook h3, Leela playing this very nice idea, just protecting the pawn, but also having some potential, you know, to cover the third rank, come over to the a file if necessary. Rook a1, knight c2, rook a4, bishop b6. Another nice little idea there. Going to play bishop a5 and free this knight to come places, or even just play bishop c7 and attack the pawn on d6. Rook a2, bishop d1. Again, you're not worried about this pawn going. You know, you'll just play something like bishop c7 and attack this d6 pawn, win that one, and then yeah, keep on going. So king f8 played to be able to defend the pawn on d6. King f1, getting out of the way of this. King e7, bishop a5. So yeah, I mean, black again could take this pawn on g4, but then what we're going to do is we're going to take, and then this rook will show its true purpose here and come in here, and then we're going to come in and check or come to the 8th rank, maybe pick up this bishop on h8. So a Dragon just has to keep on staying still, knight d3. And then the question is, you know, how do we eject that knight on d3 and that rook on a2? Well, it just takes some very careful, cautious play. Knight c1, king e3, knight b3, bishop b6, and we're just going to get our rook to a protected square, and then play something like knight d4 and swap off this knight. And then it'll only be an active black rook that's left over, with all these dead pieces still there. You know, gradually black's whole worldview is getting squeezed, basically, with Leela's play there. Knight a1, king d2, bishop f7, king c1, and Dragon took the decision that it had to exchange off the knights there. So rook a1 check, and rook a6, bishop e3. So I was sort of, you know, obviously black's completely tied down. These bishops have got zero scope now. How are you going to make the breakthrough? And I was sort of, you know, trying to, I was mainly thinking about playing e5 here, which is probably a very dangerous plan as well. We see it a number of times. But it does mean that after f takes e5, this bishop could, you know, maybe get a little bit active. But Leela actually had a completely different plan, which was surprising and amazing. So a little bit of manoeuvring here. Again, we're not even bothered about this this b pawn. That's always, you know, quite striking about this. If black takes this b pawn, then we're just going to end up exchanging off rooks on the a file, and then with this b pawn gone, the white king suddenly gains invasion squares. You know, and that's the yeah, again, you know, amazing thing about this. So many of those little ideas where, you know, black can win a pawn at all sorts of different places, but it's just with this long-term bishop on h8. Tied down by the pawn on h6, it's just no good. So king e7, bishop b6, just still ignoring this b pawn. Rook a6, bishop a5. And this is a very nice plan now. This bishop can actually also prove like a little barrier on the A file to invade. I'll just show you this continuation. This was between Stockfish and Dragon, and I really loved it. It might remind you of a very famous game. Bishop e8, bishop b6, rook b8, bishop a7, rook a8, rook a3. There's a famous game, Karpov against, it's Unziker, isn't it, or Ullmann? Oh, I always get those two mixed up for that game. Where Karpov played bishop a7 and then doubled up its rooks behind. And this is again a similar sort of idea, just going rook a5, and then we'll move the bishop away and offer the exchange of rooks. The rook will have to give way, and we'll get the a7 square. Just a very nice, elegant way of doing that. So rook a7 was played in our game, and then Leela just did something completely different. Bishop a2, bishop e8, and bishop takes c4. Shocking! A piece sacrifice. And also, we're freeing this bishop on e8, but of course, if this bishop tries to get active now, we just go rook c4, and then we'll take this poor bishop on h8. And of course, the advantage of this AlphaZero style pawn on h6 is that, it creates a weakness of the pawn on h7. We're just going to take the bishop on h8, take the pawn on h7, swap off rooks, and then queen the h pawn. That pawn on h6 accelerates so many scenarios. It's incredible. So bishop d7 played, king c3. We're going to bring the king in, and now an absolutely gorgeous move. And I mean, you have to have seen all of this really, in order to turn this position into a win. And it's just rook c6. We can simply give away the exchange there. And again, the fact that we've got bishop and connected pawns against the rook, and that this bishop is completely dead, that makes it all worthwhile. I mean, Komodo didn't take it. If Komodo had taken it, then takes, rook a7, king c4, king b5, king a6, a bit of desperation with d5, and we get into c7, and we're going either pushing the pawn all the way or just going king b7 and queening. Just depends what you want to do. And look how helpless the bishop and also the rook is as well. Amazing, just amazing positional control there from Leela. So after rook a7, we get king c4, bishop e8, king b5, king b6, b5, and it's all completely gone. And well, here, Komodo took the desperation route with bishop g7, but after takes, king a6, the b pawn just ran all the way. Amazing game there from Leela against Komodo Dragon, and well, I hope that you enjoyed that and also got quite a few tips for the opening. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly as well in the middle game, this typical mistake, knight b5, and then Leela's play to block in this dark square bishop with h6, and then squeeze the pawn structure as well afterwards with f4 to f5. I mean, really, it's completely possible to have something like this in your games. And yeah, I mean, this template of Leela's is quite extraordinary. So so there we are. I mean, I hope you enjoyed that. If you liked the video, it was a little bit long, but I hope still instructive. Why not give a like or subscribe to the channel, or take a look at my new book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, available paperback or digitally from Forward Chess, which is absolutely great, and also on the Amazon Kindle, full of analysis of games like this, and also lots of tips for how to work with engines. But otherwise, thank you very much for watching this video, and really hope to see you at the next one. Thanks for watching.